What's up everyone, and welcome back to HateWatchers for our comedy breakdown and review of the second episode of The Last of Us, entitled Infected. Let's get right into the breakdown. Spoilers ahead. We start off with a flashback to Wuhan, Indonesia in 2003, where people are living in the golden age when you could smoke at lunch. In fact, some cops come in and arrest this woman for not smoking. She's a fungus professor, and they ask her to look into a microscope so she can give her opinion on President Xi Jinping's penis. Instead, she sees a fungal Cordyceps sample taken from a human. She puts on this hazmat suit that has hair ribbons for some reason so she can inspect some genderless corpse. She gets bored and starts playing with they/them before trying her hand at dentistry, but it doesn't go well. She farts in her suit and has to pull the cord and get out of there. The cop explains that the people this gender-free person bit were killed, and he immediately demands a vaccine, because that's the solution to everything. The professor offers her simple, subtle solution instead.
Bom, mulailah pengoboman. Bom seluruh kota dan seluruh orang yang ada di dalamnya.
We jump to the here and now where Ellie is in the fetal position and Joel is ready to blow her away in case she starts to turn into an infected. Joel doesn't waste a golden opportunity to inject some comic relief.
There's not gonna be anything bad in here?
Just you.
Oh, funny.
He tells Tess that Ellie will turn sooner or later. In this post-apocalyptic wasteland, it's important to find ways to entertain yourself, like watching other people eat. Ellie tells them that she's the key and cure to everything, and that Joel and Tess are supposed to deliver her to the Fireflies so they can develop a vaccine. Ellie suddenly develops Tourette's, but Tess cures her.
Don't.
The three head outside into the aftermath of Woodstock 99 and get a move on. They stop and look at the spot where Queen Lizzo collapsed during the outbreak. They walk past all these cars of people trying to get out of Woodstock 99. The camera gives us all Parkinson's trying to watch this scene. They hear an infected screeching in the distance but keep moving forward. They head to a local swimming pool and Ellie has some delusional ravings and Joel calls her out.
Yes, ma'am, right away, ma'am.
You're a weird kid.
They find their path blocked, so Joel gives Tess a boost, hey, just like in the games, up and over the obstruction so she can find a way around. Ellie and Joel bond over his disinterest in answering questions about himself. We learn that infected can survive anywhere from a month to 20 years after infection, and Joel says it's hard to kill infected knowing they were once people.
Sometimes.
They see a huge crowd of homeless tweakers picking each other's butts down below as they discuss the hive mind properties of the infected. The party decides to cut through the museum, and they open up their inventory and equip their weapons and flashlights. Ellie finds a recently killed dude, and they freak out, proceeding with caution. They're heading to the second floor when an earthquake shakes loose part of the cocaine exhibit upstairs. Ellie steps on a zombie's hand, gloating about her immunity and rubbing it in everyone's face. We hear a clicker around the corner who's just innocently trying to enjoy the museum. Joel tries to do sign language, but he sucks at it. Ellie continues to fuck things up and the clickers hear her. We learn that Joel and Tess are just as bad shots as we are in the games, and they're forced to flee from two clickers. It's Joel's turn to fuck things up and the clicker pounces on them, and Joel finally gets a shot even he can't miss. The second clicker comes running and Tess and Joel tag team it. Ellie gets bit in the exact same spot as before. They exit the museum and Tess snaps at Joel for not being an optimist. Gee, can you blame him? The party continues on to the Capitol building in search of Ellie's pickup team. Joel finds their vehicle empty and full of blood. Must have been a woman driver, am I right, fellas? They see a trail of blood heading into the building, which, depending on the time of month, proves my woman driver theory. They find the pickup crew dead as one got sick and the healthy ones apparently turned on them and everyone died. Tess snaps at Joel again, and it looks like it may be her time of the month. Tess admits that she's infected in a scene with dialogue lifted straight from the game, and then Tess randomly shows Joel this rosacea flare-up on her neck. She tells Joel that Ellie is the real deal and tells him to take her to Bill and Frank. Then this homeless guy rolls in asking for some change, but Joel only gives him lead. The nearby homeless encampment comes to the aid of their fallen brother. Tess offers to stay behind and cover Joel and Ellie's escape. The homeless horde comes in, and this absolute Chad just starts making out with Tess. She ultimately rejects him though, and blows the room sky high, igniting the homeless people and making a meaningful difference in cleaning up the streets. Ellie decides she's not really enjoying her first field trip to the museum and the Capitol building as much anymore, and the episode comes to an end. And with that, we've reached that point in the video where we have to decide if this episode was a great watch or a hate watch. Well, this second episode was another great watch. As we mentioned in the video on last week's premiere episode, all this show has to do is basically stick to the script of the first game and it'll be a hit. And so far, so good in that regard. There weren't as many memorable scenes from the game in this episode for them to faithfully recreate as there were in the premiere, but in general it stayed true to the game's version of events. There is a small change as, if I recall correctly, at this point in the game it's actually Fedra soldiers that killed the Firefly pickup team and were going after Joel, Tess, and Ellie, rather than infected. But we think it plays better for the show, as it functions as a means to introduce the audience as to how the infected operate, which is going to be a valuable insight for the rest of the season. We felt that this episode really gave us our first in-depth look at the kind of production quality we'll be getting for this show, and they've knocked it out of the park up to this point. The desecrated city, the plant life that's grown its way over everything that the people have left behind, it all looks incredible. And of course, the infected. Wow, they look tremendous. The Last of Us took a unique angle to the cause of their zombie outbreak, opting for a fungal catalyst rather than the more typical virus-oriented approach. And it pays off on screen when we get to see these mushroom heads up close. They have a truly terrifying yet mesmerizing appearance, and the design team captured it perfectly for the show. So while our protagonists don't want to be anywhere near these clickers, we in the audience can't help but want to see these things right in their faces. We also think they're doing a great job at incorporating references to and Easter eggs from the games into the show without letting it feel like cheap fan service. So far, it's really just been minor things sprinkled in here and there that don't distract from the story, and that's exactly how Easter eggs should be handled. If you didn't play the games, you wouldn't even pick up on them. Little things like the gang equipping flashlights before going into a dark building, Joel boosting his companion up over a ledge, calling this type of infected by their in-game name clickers, it all does a wonderful job of giving a nod to fans of the video games while not pulling the story off the rails to do so. Tess's sacrifice here was handled really well, and maybe it's just us, but we felt like it carried more weight here than it did in the game. Rather than her sacrifice heading off a handful of troops that Joel and Ellie might have been able to handle, this time around she makes it count as she takes out a full-on horde of infected that Joel and Ellie would not have escaped from otherwise. It was done really well and possibly improved on the game's version. We also liked seeing Joel's gruffness toward Ellie at this point, which is expected. We particularly liked the line where he tells Tess to stop talking about Ellie like she's got some kind of life in front of her. It's going to be one of those lines we look back at as an example of his and Ellie's evolving relationship. But for spoiler purposes for the rest of the season, we won't go any further on that discussion just yet. Now we do take a bit of exception with how the show handled the reveal of Ellie's infection and her supposed immunity. Several of you mentioned it in the comments on last week's video, and we couldn't agree more. The initial mention of her infection in the previous episode happened in the blink of an eye, and the show's tone in that moment caused Joel's instance of PTSD to totally overshadow this big, extremely important reveal. And unfortunately, that kind of nonchalant approach continued in this episode, where Ellie just flat out says that she's immune and some doctors need her to create a cure. It's really a bigger deal than this show is making it out to be, and it's odd that this one major aspect of the original story isn't being treated with more reverence. But that's our only major issue with this adaptation up to this point. Oh, and several people thought that the first episode was boring. We think it was probably longer than it needed to be, but we didn't share that opinion in general. Maybe we were too distracted picking up on really subtle hints of the spreading infection early on, or looking at how all the pieces of the story were falling into place building up to the major events from the video game. Regardless, I doubt anyone was bored with this episode, that's for sure. Now we'll repeat this until the end of the season, but stick to the script and everything will turn out great for The Last of Us. That being said, reportedly the next episode is supposed to introduce the first significant deviation from the game's story. We don't know what it'll be, but it has something to do with some known characters from the game that we're meeting for the first time next week. So we'll have to wait and see what exactly is waiting around the corner for us. For those that thought the first episode was boring or poorly paced, what were your thoughts on this episode? And what stood out to you in this one, positive or negative? How are you liking the show so far? Let us know in the comments below. Remember to hit that thumbs up if you liked the video, and click the subscribe button if you haven't already to stay up to date on the rest of the first season of The Last of Us. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.